Hi, Sophie. Hi, I'm Danny.
Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist at New York University's Stern School of Business. He studied at Yale, UPenn, the University of Chicago, and in Orissa, India. He now lives in New York with his wife, Jane, and his 2 kids. Haidt is the author of The Happiness Hypothesis, Finding Modern Truth in Ancient Wisdom, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, and The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure.
Since 2018, he has been studying the contributions of social media to the decline of teen mental health and the rise of political dysfunction. His newest book, The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing the Epidemic of Mental Illness, dives deep into the addictive nature of social media. This book is a current New York Times bestseller. Sophie and I have been reading this book in our class, Media and Identity, and we have explored how themes of excesses, use of technology, and social media have reduced risk-taking skills and lowered real-life experiences. We are so grateful Professor Haidt can join us today. Please join me in welcoming him.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Sophie and Danny. And thanks to the Taft School for inviting me. So I wrote a book about your generation, a book about adolescence. And while I do teach, I teach at NYU, so I am talking with college students, but I don't have as much contact with younger adolescents. I'm going to show you some data. I'm going to tell a story about what I think happened to your generation. And it's going to paint a fairly negative view of your generation overall. What I've found in talking about this is that your generation is not at all defensive, that you're very thoughtful about what's been happening, what technology has done. And so I'll present a sort of an overview of what I found, what the book is about, and then I want you to tell me, especially where I've gotten anything wrong. An amazing thing happens when you ask people to tell you what you got wrong, is that they oblige and then they make you better, they make you smarter, they make you more correct. So, and we have time for Q&A, and I especially hope that anyone who's critical of what I said will speak up first. All right, so let's go. I'm going to start with some questions for you. So, I guess I'm going to have to keep turning my head to see this. There's no monitor. Let's see. Okay, over here. So let me get a sense of your social, your use of TikTok as one platform. So first, how many of you would say that you currently, these days, you spend an hour a day or more on TikTok? Raise your hand high if that's you. Okay, so it's less than half, but it's a lot. Okay, how about, for how many of you is it true that there was a period in your life when you spent an hour or more on TikTok on most days? Raise your hand if you were ever a fairly heavy TikTok user. Okay, that looks like maybe half, a little more than half maybe. Okay, so there's obviously a lot of experience with TikTok, although half of you really were never heavy TikTok users. Okay, next. How many of you would be pleased if your parents somehow stopped you from ever viewing TikTok? They took you off of it. Raise your hand if you would like that. Raise your hand. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 15, 10 or 15 of you, okay? So half of you use it, but only a few of you wish that you could be stopped from using it. Okay, how about this? How many of you would be pleased if the age limit was raised to 18 nationally? There was something done about social media so that nobody could be on it until they were 18. Raise your hand. How many of you like that? Raise your hand. Okay, so more of you than the previous one. If everybody's off it, it's better. It's more than if it's just you who's taken off. And finally, would you say overall, thinking on the effect of TikTok on you, on your friends, on society, how many of you would actually prefer that TikTok and then YouTube Shorts and all the other ones that was just never invented? It just wasn't part of the world. Raise your hand high if you wish it was never invented. Okay, so the faculty, so that's it's less than half, but it's a lot of you. So faculty watching, you probably can't see the audience, but I'd say maybe 30 or 40% said they wish that TikTok was never invented. This is a platform that many of you are spending an hour a day on, and people outside the school are spending a lot more time than that on TikTok. Finally, let me ask explicitly about the other side. How many of you think TikTok is great? You love it and you think it plays a positive role in your life? Raise your hand high. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 10, about 12 or 15. Okay? All right. So I asked these questions of you because I teamed up with the head of the Harris poll. Reached out to me. A lot of people read my book, and people who have children almost always love the book and are alarmed by what's happening to their kids, and they see it. So a lot of people come to me like, how can I help? And so Chris Johnson, head of the Harris poll, said, can we do a survey together? So Zach Roush, my researcher, and we made up a bunch of questions. And one of them was like that last question I asked you. And it was, we asked people about a bunch of different things. I wish Twitter had never been invented. Agree or disagree? I wish TikTok had never been invented. What you see here is, I think, is very interesting, is the amount of regret down here is quite low. So, and this is all older Gen Z. This is all 18 to 27 years old. So just slightly older than you. And what you see is that your generation doesn't regret the existence of smartphones, basically communication. The communication function you appreciate, we all do. But it's the social media specifically, it's these things. These are the things that people regret, even when they're heavy users of them. Now, how could that be, that many people are heavy users, 5 hours a day, and they wish it was never invented? Well, that's actually what addiction is. So let's talk about this. So my book is kind of a tragedy in 2 acts. There's 2 things that happened in sequence. The first is that in the United States, we lost the play-based childhood from the late 1980s especially, and in the 1990s, we stopped letting kids out. So I grew up in the 1970s. There was a huge crime wave. There's a lot of drunk driving, but all kids went out to play. That was just obviously what kids do. They go out to play unsupervised. That's what you do. And in the 90s, the crime rate plummeted. Drunk driving was greatly reduced. The world got really, really safe for kids in the 90s. But we freaked out that if we ever took our eyes off our kids, they'd be abducted. And it was never true. But we freaked out about it. We got very scared. We stopped trusting our neighbors. And so your childhood, on average, if you grew up in the United States or Canada or Britain, was severely curtailed in terms of freedom, independence, play, exploration, risk-taking, excitement, adventure, things like that. So that's Act 1, is we lose the play-based childhood. Act 2 is this incredibly intense period of change let's see, some of you would, the older ones of you would remember this. Life changed radically for young people between 2010 and 2015, and I'll show you that in a moment. The theme of my book is that we, meaning we adults, we have overprotected our children in the real world, which has gotten increasingly safe, and where young people need a huge amount of experience. And we've underprotected them online, which is a world that's gotten increasingly dangerous, and where kids don't need a lot of experience. So I'll make 4 points, and then we'll have time for discussion. So first, what happened? I got into this topic originally because as a college professor, like many college professors, we noticed that the students arriving on campus in 2014 and 2015 were really different from those who were arriving 2 or 3 years earlier. So in 2012, all of the students in college were millennials, and these were the rates of various disabilities. And then those arriving in 2014 is the beginning of Gen Z. You can see these rates are a little bit higher. What's the yellow line? The yellow line is psychological disorders. That's the big difference between your generation and the millennials. You have 2 or 3 times the rate of mental disorders, especially anxiety and depression. And this is representative data from student health centers of universities or colleges around the country. And in all the graphs I'm going to show you, there's no trend before 2010. The lines are always flat before 2010, and then this happens. So what we see here is that rates are up for everything, but the biggest increases, both relative and certainly absolute, are anxiety and depression. That's really the focus. That's really the big change, is that your generation is much more anxious and depressed than any known previous generation in history. And it's just your generation. It's not that everybody got more anxious and depressed in the 2010s. Older people, no change really at all. The millennials, the younger millennials are up somewhat, but really it's Gen Z, which suddenly, there was no sign of a problem. They were a little more anxious before, but now young people are much, much more anxious than older people. All of this stuff is gendered. Issues around anxiety and depression are always higher in girls, beginning especially in puberty. There's a big increase in girls' anxiety and depression in puberty. And so you can see that before 2010, those were the rates. That's the rate for American teen females and males for having had a major depressive disorder. And then this happens. Now here actually, in this particular graph, the relative increase is actually slightly larger for boys as a percentage. But the absolute increase is gigantic for girls, and it's now just a normal part of being an American girl is that you have been depressed. 1/3 of American teenage girls have thought seriously about suicide. CDC data shows that 1/4 of American teenage girls have made a suicide plan. At least they thought about how they would kill themselves. So somehow or other, in the 2010s, it just became a normal part of being an American teenage girl that you're thinking about death, you're thinking about killing yourself. How did this happen? I want you to notice, a lot of people say, well, COVID was terrible. Yeah, COVID was terrible, but all of this was baked in before COVID. So yeah, COVID accelerated it a little bit and then goes back down, but basically the trend line is just continuing on unabated. Now, some critics have said, oh, come on, the kids are all right. This is just self-report data. Gen Z, they're so comfortable talking about mental health. That's a good thing. They're open about it. They're not suppressing it. Well, if that was the case, it was just that your generation is more open to talking about it, then we wouldn't see these trends in behavior, only in what you say. But when we look at, this is actually emergency room visits for non-fatal self-harm, mostly cutting or taking overdoses of pills, we see the same pattern. So girls are up 188%. Now this is for the younger teenage girls. That's where you get the biggest increases. The older teenage girls, you also see the same pattern, not quite as dramatic, but especially when we look at 10 to 14-year-old girls, they did not used to cut themselves or kill themselves. It was very, very rare, and now it's not rare, because we see the same pattern in suicide. So here, boys actually have higher rates, because when girls make more attempts at suicide, but they tend to use reversible means, and boys, when boys make a suicide attempt, they seem to be really, truly trying to kill themselves, and they tend to use guns or tall buildings. So we end up with suicide being a bigger issue for boys than girls. More boys die from suicide. And the rates were pretty steady, actually, in the late 90s all the way through 2010, and then this happens. Now here it's up a lot for both boys and girls. But this is absolutely stunning, that in a single year, the suicide rate for younger teen girls increased 67%. And you'll see this in a lot of the graphs in the book. The boys are doing much worse too, but the boys' curves tend to be more curved. The girls, it's more like a hockey stick. There was no sign of a problem until 2012, and then it's as though someone flipped a light switch, and girls all over the developed world began checking into psychiatric emergency wards. Because as I said, it's not just the US and Canada. All of the English-speaking countries are going through this in exactly the same way. It's stunning how similar we all are. And my research group, we have very good data on Scandinavia. It's happening there. A little less so in Southern Europe. The patterns are not really happening in Eastern Europe, and we can come back to that if you're curious as to why. But across the developed world, especially in the freest countries, all of a sudden, in the early 2010s, teen mental health plunged, especially for girls. So, just to see more data. So this is from the UK. This is self-harm, the rate of self-harm in the UK. No sign of any problem, any trend before 2010, and then this happens. So it's exactly the same. Something happened that made girls start hurting themselves. And Australia, same thing. Not quite as sharp, but you see the same pattern. So we have a mystery. Since the early 2010s, young people across the developed world are becoming more anxious, depressed, and lonely, more likely to harm and kill themselves, less educated. I didn't show you these data, but American educational attainment was actually going up very slowly from the 70s until 2012, and then it starts going down. And it's not just us. This happened around the world. Around the world, young people are less educated, they're learning less than they were 15 years ago. And that has never happened before, a global reversal in education. So why? Any theories? What changed in the early 2010s? Call it out, what do you think? Global warming? Yeah, if it was 2017 or whenever Greta Thunberg started, that would make sense. But there wasn't any event around 2012 that especially hit the younger girls. But that's a good theory for, that could be global. Any other theories?
Social media.
Thank you. I didn't plant that. That's the response I was looking for. Well, basically, it's more than that, though. My argument is that it's this. It's the end of this kind of childhood and the very rapid arrival of a phone-based childhood. So okay, so let's go into that. What exactly happened in those years? So we have lots of images of childhood. You've all seen stories of childhood. And in those stories, movies, Disney movies, the kids are never supervised by their parents. There wouldn't be any adventure if their parents were with them. So we think of kids out having fun, taking some risks. One of the best-selling books of the last 20 years is, oh, the places you'll go and all the adventures you'll have. But all of this is now false. And I've asked that they change the title of this to, oh, the places you won't go because we're afraid you'll be kidnapped or you'll fall and hurt yourself. Something like that. Because now, if you try to go places, your parents can be arrested. If a neighbor calls the police, now obviously you're old enough, but when you were 8 or 9, if you went out on your own, or you and your friends were out playing at 8 or 9, neighbors could call the police, and your parents could end up getting in big trouble. So I want to show you just how much things have changed. So I want you to think about, what's your answer to this question? At what age were you given some independence? You could just go out alone, walk over to a friend's house, get on your bicycle, you guys ride around town, you go down to a store, you buy ice cream, whatever it is. Was that, if that was you in first grade, then your answer is 6. If that wasn't you until 7th grade, then your answer is 12 or 14 or 16 or whatever. So think about your answer, and what we're going to do is I'm going to sweep my finger across the room, and when I get to your section, I want you to yell it out, okay? Now first, how many, let me just get a sense, how many adults do we have in the room, that is, let's say, born before 1985? Raise your hand high if you're born before 1985. Okay, we have enough to do it, all right. So what I want is, okay, so first, just the students, just if you were born after 1995, which all of the students were, okay? So only you. You got your number? Okay, remember, when I point to your area, just yell it out, okay? Ready? Go.
12.
Okay, all right, so that was a total mess. I couldn't hear anything. But my sense was, there were some 8s, but my sense was that 12 was the mode. What did you think? What did you call it? What do you think was the mode? Most 12. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of emerged. That's kind of emerged as the norm here. In fact, I'll show you what I always find. I should do, okay, wait, I'll do the, I usually start with the adults. I should start with the adults. What I always find for Gen Z is this. It's 10 or 12 is what I find. Let's just check with the adults. So just those born before, say, 1985, when I point to your section of the room, just yell it out. 8, 5, 4. Okay, so every single response was a single-digit number, and most of them were not 8 or 9. So it's like 6 to 8. That used to be the norm during the crime wave, during the days of drunk driving. That was just the norm in developed countries, and it's even younger in traditional societies. So something changed, and as the world got incredibly safe, we started locking up kids and saying you can't go out. Now, as that was happening, and related to it, the internet was coming in, and this is part of the story. And the thing that I didn't realize until I really dug into the trends was that the internet came in 2 waves, and the first wave was amazing. And the millennials grew up with this early internet, and they loved it. and it made them creative, and they started companies, and their mental health is fine. And so we all thought in the early 2000s, oh, computers, the internet, this is good for kids. It's okay that our kids aren't going out and playing anymore. They're playing in cyberspace. Isn't that cool? They're playing in cyberspace. So that's going to be like the future. So we didn't really notice that this second wave, which is social media, beginning with MySpace and Friendster and Facebook in 2003, 2004, this incredibly rapid adoption of social media paired with the smartphones, that in this period here, now you can be on social media all day long. That was not possible before the smartphone. You could spend a few hours a day on Facebook when it first came out, but you couldn't spend 12 hours a day. You couldn't even spend 6 hours a day on it. But this really transformed things. And while it was happening, we still thought technology is good, it's good for kids. But we were wrong. Because this is exactly when teen mental health plummets, and I've got a lot of evidence that it was not just a correlation, it was a cause. You can see the transformation in this slide. The millennials, and many of the adults who raised their hand are millennials, you'll remember having a flip phone, right? A phone where, you have to press the S key how many times to make there's no S key, I'm sorry, like the 7 key, whatever, I forget what it was. But you learn to type by pressing number keys until you get a letter, and then you move on to the next letter. And so it wasn't ideal for long communication. So you would just use it as a tool, like, see you at 3. You'd use it to connect and get together. So this was not harmful to mental health. But this changed very, very quickly to this. And Gen Z, I believe, is defined by the fact that your generation, went through puberty from the beginning to end, puberty starting around 11, 12 years old, from beginning to end with a smartphone and social media. And that changes people. So the front-facing camera, everything's about photographs, you're always on the stage, high-speed internet, you're constantly being interrupted. So it's this change of technology turns out to, I think, have been completely transformative for human development and mental health. So we go from childhood used to be like this, and the older people in the audience will recognize that back in the 80s, it was just normal to ride around your hometown on your bicycle with your buddies and an extraterrestrial in the basket. It was just like a normal thing to do. So it's the movie E.T. But now it's this. And as I understand it, if you're a boy and you want to play with your friends, you can't go over to their house, right? If you want to play video games, which is most of what is being done, you have to go home so that you can use your headset, your controller. Is that right? That you have to, so you play a lot of video games, and that's social in a way, but it means you're not physically with your friends nearly as much as boys used to be, and certainly for girls, it's exactly as bad. So you can see this in the data here. This is a survey of how Americans use their time, and this is how many minutes a day are you spending with friends, outside of work and school, not counting work and school. And what we find is that the youngest age group used to spend 2 hours a day with their friends. Older people were spending 45 minutes on average because, we're married, we have jobs, we're not hanging out with our buddies hours a day. But young people used to hang out with their friends. And then this happens. And I want you to notice that the 2019 data point was collected before we had any idea what COVID was. And then the 2020 data point was collected in May of 2020 during maximum lockdown. Do you see the effect of COVID in that line? No, you don't, because it was Gen Z began socially distancing as soon as they got their smartphones. And they were socially distancing very, very rapidly. They were no longer spending time with their friends in person. Of course, you're texting, you're posting, you're interacting online, but time physically together, where you might touch or hug or make a joke together or laugh together, all that stuff plummets. And by the time COVID comes in, Gen Z was already socially distanced. They just kind of finished off the job there. And this number, sorry, oh, there's the back, yeah. This number, look at that, 45 minutes a day, that overstates the amount of actual interaction, because a lot of the time when you're with your friends, you're doing this. So the amount of time that you're truly with your friends has plunged compared to any generation of human beings. So my book goes into great detail on the psychology of this, what happens when a device moves to the center of your attention. And I won't go through these in detail, we can talk about them if you're curious, but the social deprivation I just described, sleep deprivation, it reduces your sleep, which has all kinds of physical and mental health effects. Attention fragmentation, it's just harder to stay on task. And I promise you, we adults are all feeling this too. But it affects young people more because your brain is developing. You're developing the neurological basis of focused attention, which is really hard to do. So a life online disrupts that. And of course, much of this is addictive. Between 2 and 10% of young people count as being addicted. It's called problematic use. There's a whole chapter on what social media is doing to girls, because the girl's story is very different from the boy's story. Social media is a trap for girls. It was designed that way. The way you lure, what a trap is you have bait to attract the creature you want to trap. And then once the creature takes the bait, then they can't get out. That's what a trap is. And so if you're designing a company to trap girls, what are you going to use as bait? Social information. Girls have a much more developed map of social space. They're much more interested in who said what about whom, who is friends with whom, who's enemies with whom. So girls are very interested in that, more so than boys. And so they get pulled in, and once they're in, they can't leave. Because once all the girls are talking on Instagram, if you quit, you're isolated, you're alone. So girls were very quickly trapped in 2012. That's when Facebook buys Instagram. And that's when it blows up, becomes super popular. And that's when the older Gen Z girls move their social life onto Instagram in particular. So once you're on social media, especially Instagram, your life is full of visual comparison of every aspect of your body, your looks, your hair, perfectionism, relational aggression, all the mean girl stuff. So for all kinds of reasons, social media is much more harmful psychologically to girls than it is for boys. Now the boys' story is very different. Boys and girls are all on their devices around 8 to 10 hours a day. At least, you know, and I'm so thrilled to hear that you have this policy that this can't happen to you here, but in most of the country, boys and girls are on their devices 8 to 10 hours a day. And the boys' story is, it doesn't start in 2010. It actually is that boys have been retreating from the real world since the 70s and 80s. We've been cracking down on recess, on risk, on adventure, on roughhousing, on running around. So school becomes much more just long periods of sitting in class because we have to get, you know, in America freaked out in the 80s. We're losing out to, you know, Asian countries in math. We've got to give our kids more math, less recess, less art, less everything else. So school becomes increasingly inhospitable to boys in the 80s. Boys began checking out. At every level, from kindergarten through PhD, girls are crushing boys. Boys are just not doing very well in this country compared to girls. But that's okay because the boys have all these amazing virtual things that they can go into. The video games just get better and better. The porn gets more intense, and of course it evolves. I mean, it's, you know, the algorithms select what is maximally erotically appealing. So if we check in, what I'm finding is that, okay, there's all kinds of jokes I could make, but I won't. If we check in on your generation at the age of 14, what we see is that the girls are doing worse. The girls have much higher rates of anxiety and depression. And the boys are actually having some fun, I mean, because they're playing video games and porn, and they like that. So at 14, it looks like this is mostly a girl problem. But if we check in on the older members of Gen Z at age 28, what do we see? What we see is that the girls have largely they got into college and they completed college, and then they got jobs. Whereas the boys are much more likely to have never gone to college. If they went to college, they're more likely to have failed out. And if they finish college, even still, they're more likely to be living at home with their parents. Boys are missing out on life. They're missing out on development. They're just doing video games and porn. Now, obviously, I'm exaggerating, and in this group, I'm sure it's not true about you, but nationally speaking, we're losing a generation of boys to these entertaining activities that block human development. There's a wonderful book by my friend Richard Reeves of Boys and Men. He has this incredible line in there. He says, while of course we should celebrate the rise of women and the increasing success of women, he says, a world of floundering men is unlikely to be a world of flourishing women. So this is the saddest graph in the whole book. There's a question, the Monitoring the Future study, some of you I'm sure took it. It's administered in high school. I don't know if this school probably doesn't participate, but there's a nationally representative data set. And one of the questions is, I feel that my life is not very useful. And as you can see, about 8 or 9% of boys and girls used to agree with that statement until 2011, and then this happens. All of a sudden, as soon as young people get super connected by these amazing digital devices, hundreds and hundreds of friends, you don't have time for any friends, and you don't really have friends as close as used to be. And so we get this almost instant, huge increase in the sense that life is meaningless. My life is not meaningful. And again, I think this is because of the great rewiring of childhood. So, how do we get out of this? Well, we got trapped into this because these social networks have these incredible emergent properties. The reason why you had to have Instagram in middle school is because everyone else had Instagram in middle school. And so the way out, it turns out, is collective action as well. So what I do in the book is I propose, with these 4 norms, we can actually roll back the phone-based childhood, but we have to do them together. So no smartphone before high school. This is not a law. I'm not proposing a law. I'm proposing a norm that parents just agree. We're not giving kids the entire internet and access to strangers and pornography all the time in middle school. We're going to wait till high school to do that. So if we could simply delay, just give kids a flip phone in middle school, but delay till high school, that would really help. And let's delay social media even further. Social media, I believe, is wildly inappropriate for minors. Some of you have good experiences on it, but the amount of graphic sex and horrible violence, addiction, contact by men who want to have sex with you, I mean, things that happen online to children is absurd. So I think that we should just raise the age to 16 and enforce it. Phone-free schools, which you're doing here, and we'll talk about that in the discussion. I want to find out from you how it's going. And then it's not just about taking away the screen time. We have to then give kids back the kind of fun, adventurous childhood that your parents and grandparents had, that we evolved to have as mammals. Mammals play, all mammals play. So that's what we need to do. Just very briefly, no smartphone before high school. And this cartoon, well, the older people will appreciate this. It's been so nice getting to interact with you for these past 6 years. Here's your first device. Norm number 2, no social media before 16. The people who created this, they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew what dopamine was. They knew about reinforcement schedules. They used psychology. Some of them took a course at Stanford called Persuasive Design. It was how do you hook people, and especially adolescents who don't have as much self-control. So they deliberately tried to hack in, and it's just not appropriate for kids to be they're easy marks and victims. Third, as I said, is phone-free schools, which is happening at lightning speed around the country and around the world, because all the teachers hate the phones. All the principals hate the phones. It's very hard to teach anyway, and to teach kids who have the entire internet in their pocket and are watching it during class. My kids go to New York City public schools. They say, the rule is you can't use your phone during class. You can use it between classes, you can use it at lunch, but if you want to use it during class, you have to hide it in your desk or behind a book. That's the rule. So it's no rule at all. Virginia just announced all schools are going phone-free. California just ought to do the same. So this is happening very, very fast. I'm really pleased by this. And again, as I said, the teachers hate the phones. And every school that goes phone-free has the same response. The students at first are wary. They don't want it to happen, a lot of them. And on the first couple days, there's a lot of discomfort. But a couple weeks in, they're laughing, joking, talking, having more fun at lunch, having more fun between classes. So every school that I've ever found has a really good experience a couple weeks in, so we'll talk about that. And finally, far more independence and free play in the real world. So I'll close with some specific advice, both to the faculty and to the students. So I have a website for the whole project. If you go to anxiousgeneration.com, and then you click on Take Action, there's a section for educators in schools. And so faculty watching in another room, I hope they'll go to the site. We have some specific things to offer. One is an educator action guide, which just sort of summarizes 4 steps. So we talk about phone-free schools, which you're already doing here. More independence and free play. That's more an issue in K-8, although you should think about the degree to which you have time to just hang out in unstructured time. I imagine you do have that here. The third is the Let Grow experience. Again, that's more for K-8. And send a memo to parents to be in communication with the parents about the phone policy, about why are we putting these restrictions on. So we have a bunch of resources for schools. And then for you in the audience here, the students, I hope you'll check out Actions for Gen Z. We have all sorts of materials and ideas. One thing I just want to point out, I teach a course at NYU called Flourishing. It's for freshmen and sophomores at NYU Stern. And here's the part of the syllabus is there. These are the books that we read. These books are amazing. I would recommend all of these to you. And again, you can just get the syllabus on the website. The Stoic Challenge is a really powerful book in how to basically be a modern Stoic, how to not get upset about little things, how to take control of your emotions. The course is arranged around 3 goals. I work with the students over the semester to become stronger, emotionally stronger, smarter. If you reduce your notifications, if you regain control of your attention, it's as though you've raised your IQ by 10 or 15 points. So you can literally make yourself smarter by having good technology habits, as opposed to most of us have bad technology habits, which make us stupider. And more sociable. So we read Dale Carnegie and learn how to start conversations. And so anyway, there's a lot that you can do. So my students are very much like you. They've grown up with a lot of media use. A lot of them are addicted. But over the course of a semester, they regain control of their attention. They get a lot more time in their day. And then they discover they can have more fun. They can have hobbies. They can go out with friends. So we get amazing results. And the promise I make to them is that if we can make you stronger, smarter, more sociable, then you will be more successful at work and in relationships. And if you're more successful in work and relationships, then you will be happier. That's the way happiness works. Happiness is mostly a matter of the state of your relationships and then some sense that you matter, that you're doing something productive. So that's my talk to you. I've covered these points. And now, please help me. I want to know, actually, how are we doing Q&A? Is it people stand up and talk, or what? Oh, do we have microphones for them, or what? Okay, very good. Okay, good. So I hope you'll especially these questions here, if you have any criticism of what I've said, I hope you'll be one of the first speakers, first to ask a question. And with that, I thank you for your attention. Let's talk.